Now you've heard some of the things that are going on at the federal level. What we'd like to do is begin to localize this. Our first speaker is Marty McBride. Marty, would you come on up here? Marty is a supervisory special agent assigned to lead the cyber squad of the FBI's New Haven field office. The cyber squad is responsible for investigating national security and criminal and computer crimes, intrusions, and other high-tech activities that are in violation of U.S. law. And he prosecutes such violations when they are in the state of Connecticut, in this area. He also served as the FBI's coordinator for McBride for a number of years, which is the FBI's outreach program to business and military, as well as the Bureau's Cybersecurity Division program manager.
I just want to make a few brief opening remarks so we can make sure there's plenty of time for your questions for the question and answer period. The FBI has top priorities, just as any organization would, since 2001 when the World Trade Centers were taken down. The priorities have been, the top three priorities have been unchanged. Number one is counterterrorism. Some might question 14 years later, why is counterterrorism still on the top of the priority list? Because we haven't seen anything since 2001 in the homeland. Well, maybe because it's priority number one that you're not seeing stuff. Number two is counterintelligence, and number three is cyber. Cyber is its own priority. However, counterintelligence has a very big connection to cyber. So to say that counterintelligence is 2 and cyber is 3, yes, cyber is 3, but cyber is also heavily involved in 2. And as we move forward, it may also become involved in 1. We're looking at a lot of anybody that's watching the news sees that ISIL is really up to speed on modern technologies. The videos they put out are like Hollywood productions. So it's only a matter of time before they really get a handle on how to use the internet. As a cyber task force, what we look for are computer intrusions and high-tech crimes that are beyond the ability for most of our agents to handle. Fraud is a relatively simple cyber crime to investigate because there's usually a money trail to follow. However, if it's a large dollar value or if there are a very large number of victims, our cyber task force will use its expertise to look into those cases. Threats. There are a lot of threats that go through the internet. A lot of them originate from overseas and have no basis in reality. They're just trying to scare you to send money to them. We don't investigate threats unless they're specific and we believe they're really going to happen. So if we get a threat over the internet that somebody says, I'm going to come to such and such a school tomorrow morning with my AR-15 and a few shotguns and some IEDs and blow up all the students, we're going to take that seriously because we can defend tomorrow. If they say, I wish the schools all over the United States would be blown up. Well, there's nothing specific that we can do with that, so we're not going to. As the Congressman alluded to, the internet is a global activity. It's to everyone's benefit, not just the United States citizens, but to citizens of the world, for the internet to be secure and safe for operation. The FBI is figuring that out. And we've been sharing information as much as we could for the last several years, and the legislation will hopefully make it even easier for us to share information. Because we can't do it just the FBI, we can't do it with just our intelligence community supporting us. The most important people in this problem is the private sector, because you're more in touch with the infrastructure than anybody. Current issues that we look at, ransomware. They encrypt your computer and lock it until you pay for a decryption code. Advanced persistent threat. We talked about Russia and China. China is very big on the advanced persistent threat. They get inside your computer network. They don't want you to know they're there because they want to be there for a very long time and they want to steal all the data they can from your system. Phishing and spear phishing. Starting in 2005, I worked a case. Romania was big on the phishing, where you cast the big net, you send a few million emails hoping to get, a select group of people that are actually customers of the bank that you targeted. And only those people that have accounts with that bank might believe it. Some people that don't have an account with that bank immediately know that it's phishing. So that brings me into international investigations. How do we deal with international criminals? Well, with this case, we tried extradition. If Romanians have never come to the United States, we brought them to the United States. We gave them sentences averaging 4 years and 2 months. Their sentences are hard, not because they're in the nice U.S. prisons with TVs and weight rooms and all the other nice stuff that we give our prisoners, but because they are thousands of miles away from family, and we've talked to them. It's a very hard time. They've all requested to serve their time in Romania, and even though that's a possible thing to do, their requests are taking so long they'll probably have to serve their sentences before the request gets approved. And quite frankly, Romania is holding up the request themselves because they don't want the criminals back in their own country. Spear phishing is a social engineering technique. It's very effective. They get inside your company, your network, whatever. They find out whatever they can about you, and then they'll send an email with an attachment that's going to make people in the company believe that the email is from someone within the company. And once you click the attachment, you're now infected, and that's the prime way that the Chinese use to get their advanced persistent threat mechanisms in place. Man-in-the-middle email attacks they're getting into our email systems now. They're finding the people that move the money for a company, and then they'll find a communication where money is supposed to be transferred, and they'll insert themselves into that communication and ask that the money be transferred to a different account. Very, very difficult to detect. Service company compromise. Your electric company, it's Friday or your customer of electric company, it's Friday afternoon. Your business that does most of your work on weekends. So they call you, you got 30 minutes to pay your electric bill because we haven't received payment. And if you don't, we're going to turn your power off. Well, as a business that relies on the weekend, you can't not get this taken care of. There are two ways you can do it. One, you can go pay it in person. The other is you go to a drugstore and get a green dot card and call us with the green dot card information, and we'll take the money out of it. The trick is the locations that you can go to pay in person are all more than 30 minutes away, so you really only have one option: pay with the green dot card. Hot points. The Chinese and us long ago figured out that if somebody's trying to hit our clear defense contractors or whatnot from other countries, we better not allow those countries to come into the clear defense contractors, so we block those foreign IP addresses. So the Chinese figured out all they need to do is find a presence inside the United States and do all their computer transactions through these hot points. A hot point can be anybody. That's why it's so important that everybody, whether you're a business or a home user, everybody needs to have their computers secured, because when you're a hot point and you go to the CDC sees you as a local person who may have legitimate need to be doing communication with you. The big cases: Target, Home Depot, they got intruded in. Sony, they made themselves a target. I'm here to tell you, if you make yourself a target to a group of hackers, you are going to be hacked. The only reason other companies aren't being hacked is because they're not making themselves a target. I would venture to say that Target and Home Depot are just targets of opportunity and not specifically targeted. Anthem, they did not encrypt their PII, so that's why they're in such a world of hurt right now. To deal with the international nature of cybercrime, we have legal attaché offices in over 60 embassies throughout the world. We also have Interpol that can assist us in the mutual legal assistance treaty process. And that's where I'm going to stop and let the next guy speak, and then we'll answer your questions.
Our next speaker is Rick Harris. Rick, would you come up? Rick is a partner with the law firm of Dave Kidney. For the last 45 years after a brief career as a technology consultant, so he really was out there with the rest of us doing technology work. He's focused on an array of emerging issues involving technology and telecommunications companies. Since the early 2000s, Rick has led a team of lawyers at Pitney Day who focuses on legal issues relating to data privacy and protection. He serves on a number of national and international policy committees who are working to develop guidelines for industry, governmental agencies, and legislative bodies that will advocate for a consistent, reasonable, and rational data security legal framework for businesses operating around the nation and the world. And I wish you luck on that. In Connecticut, Rick serves as principal legal counsel for privacy matters for a range of both Fortune 100 companies and startup companies alike. We're happy to have Rick join us today.
Thank you very much, Pat. And let me also thank Marty McBride for coming, Congressman Hines, who I know had to run, and especially the Connecticut Technology Council for focusing businesses on this evolving threat to our information security. This threat isn't new. In fact, if you go back, and I'm a lawyer, so forgive me for looking at law, but if you go back and look at laws all the way back to the Hammurabi Code, there are laws focused on prosecuting people for stealing information. The only thing that's changed, really, is the vectors of attack that we face. And it seems to me that when Pat asked me to come and speak at this program, as a lawyer, I thought, well, I could talk to you about all this alphabet soup of laws that you face, 47 different state data breach laws, the U.S. Patriot Act, Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, the Health Insurance Portability Act, HITECH Act, Graham-Leach-Bliley. I could go on and on. I could talk about constitutional law, the First Amendment, as Congressman Hines alluded to, or the European concept of the right to be forgotten. But I figured by the time I got through the first 2 minutes of my talk here, most of you would be asleep except for the two lawyers who I know are out in the audience, and they were just taking copious notes. This is very exciting to them. So I'm sorry to disappoint my lawyer colleagues, Nancy, sorry about that. But instead, I'm going to try something entirely different. The topic is the top 5 things that you can do to protect your clients and your business. So I'm going to go back and take a look at, say, the last 2 years of data breach responses that I've helped my clients deal with. And I'm going to try to find or identify one common theme in that. Ultimately, I settled on the fact that many of these breaches could have been avoided by focusing on what I call the data life cycle. Let me just take a step back and say, look, you are not going to be able to prevent every breach. No amount of federal legislation, state legislation, or, thank you, Marty, but all the law enforcement in the world isn't going to stop this cold. But education of and action by our business community can significantly mitigate the harm that comes from the data breaches that we know are going to occur. So let's talk about the data life cycle. I promised 5, right? 5 things that you can do to protect your business. Well, think about the data life cycle, right? Starting with data collection, right? Data storage, then we have processing of that data, we have propagation of that data, and then finally we have this archive and destruction process. I had to combine the last two so that I could fit within the 5D. So at each stage of the life cycle, there are procedural, not technological, but procedural opportunities to reduce risk. I'm talking about low-cost, common-sense procedural changes that can reduce and, in some cases, eliminate the risks associated with data breach. So let's start with collection. Have you ever looked at what information your organization is actually collecting? And why do you collect it? Is it all needed? Let me give you an example. In my own organization, about 6 years ago, I needed a new parking card for our office space in New Haven. So we're a bureaucratic organization, of course. What they do, they send me a form, right? This is what your organizations might have done. They sent me a form, and that form asked for my name. It asked for my employee number. It asked for my car's make and model and the plate number, and also my social security number. My social security number. That was actually on the top line. And I scratched my head. I said, what are they doing? But focusing on data privacy as part of my profession, I thought, well, I'll have some fun with this. I'll trace what happens with this piece of information. So let's trace that. So I filled out the form. I actually didn't put in my real social security number. I just put in a fake social security number. Fortunately, not a federal crime here where you won't get too excited. Then I began to trace the paper. So I filled it out. I handed it to my assistant. And what did she do? She's a great assistant. What did she do? She made a copy of it. And she put it in a file folder right on her desk. Why did she make a copy? She said, well, because if it gets lost in the mail, I'll have a copy and we'll be able to resubmit it. She was great. So there it was sitting on her desk. She stuck the other one into the interoffice envelope. It took a trip from my office down to, I think, New Jersey. Somebody in New Jersey opens up that envelope, and guess what they do? They make a copy of it. And they take the original and they put it into a filing cabinet. That was a locked filing cabinet. That's great. Okay, but the piece of paper's still there. And what happens with the other piece of paper? It gets handed to somebody who does some data entry into an Excel spreadsheet. They put all the information into an Excel spreadsheet. Very nice, easy to access. What happens next? Well, this story could go on and on, right? But think about it. I now have 4 copies of my social security number floating around. My organization is now at risk. It's at greater risk than it ever needed to be. And when I asked, why do you need the social security number? What are you doing with it? There was no answer. We don't need the social security number. So, every one of your organizations, every one of your clients' organizations has this same story. And it happens again and again. You, individually, I don't think can solve the problem. But let's talk about the next thing that happens, right? Data storage. Where is the data stored? Who has access to it? If it's sensitive information, is it in a structured database? And I'm not just talking about personal information. I'm talking about some of your trade secret information. Where are you keeping the data? And who has access to it? If only some of my clients had logs showing who had accessed the data or what pieces of data had been accessed. I'll tell you, I've got a story, right? There was one case where there were over 50,000 consumers potentially affected by a data breach. So we knew a data breach had possibly occurred because there was a firewall that had been left open. Somebody poked a hole in it, right? Accidentally, it was poked open. So the firewall had been open. There was a potential for a data breach. So I said, okay, well, we need to reduce this 50,000 because the worst thing that you can do is actually send out 50,000 data breach notices to people who actually aren't infected. And why do I say that's the worst thing? It's not because you expose the business to a lot more liability, which you do, but you create anxiety out there, and in this case it was among a vulnerable population, shouldn't need to be created. So we began to look. Could we narrow this down? Well, we did have some logs, but we didn't have enough logs. And ultimately, I think we ended up sending out 10,000 breach notifications. In that case, we were able to narrow it down. But had they had logs for all access to these sensitive files, we probably would have sent either 0 or very few breach notifications. That company ended up having to pay for insurance, for credit monitoring for those individuals, all 10,000 of them. Think about the cost of that. How about data processing? Have you ever conducted a privacy or data risk assessment to determine the likelihood of a breach? Are you creating treasure troves of data all in one place, right, on one server, that really becomes very attractive to some of the folks who Marty's trying to fight off, but he sees this all the time. That data propagation issue, the making multiple copies of just that piece of paper. By the way, were the pieces of paper that were sitting around disposed of properly? Well, it turns out that the one in New Jersey got thrown away in the recycling bin. The other one I happened to watch very carefully. But the one in New Jersey got thrown away in the recycling bin. Not a very good place to throw it away. How about data archiving? How long do you keep data around? Let me tell you another story. A friend of mine had been employed for 30 years with an insurance company. He then retired. He'd been retired for 10 years. He got a notice from the insurance company, his former employer, saying, "We're sorry to inform you that there's been a data breach that affected your employment application." Your employment application. 30 years ago, he filled out an employment application. He'd been retired for 10 years. Was there any reason for that company to have kept a paper copy of his employment application around? Or, I'm not sure whether it was a paper copy or I think it was a digital version of that. But was there any reason? Right? That company had to send out a lot of those notices. Could they have reduced their risk by simply getting rid of data that was no longer necessary for the operation of the business? So,
storage is getting so cheap that it's easier to keep it than to throw it away.
In fact, right, a lot of clients would say, well, the cost of having to go through that and figure out what to throw away, I can't do it. But you've got to look at your potential cost of keeping that data around. And I've actually done some, I'm a quant. I come out of the Wharton School. I love doing financial modeling, right? So I've actually done a financial model on this and compared storage costs and costs involved in litigation and disclosure, et cetera. I can almost guarantee you that as an expected cost, your cost would probably be lower getting rid of that information than otherwise. So, bottom line, you cannot do this all alone. I'm going to encourage you to get everybody in your business educated. Educate them on these issues, right? These very simple, easy to take steps of, how about telling everybody that before they fill out a form within your organization, or before they ask a customer to fill out a form in your organization, have them look to see whether that form should be revised, and then have somebody they can go to in your organization, right? Maybe a chief privacy officer, a chief security officer, who they can say, gee, maybe we should consider revising this form. And don't ignore what they have to say. Actually, the folks who are on the ground in your organization see the problems much quicker than you at the top level might see the problems. So, I end with that. I hope my 5 points will actually help your organizations reduce your risk. And I'll be here for questions later.